those who's inviting me down there on such short notice. Even if I wanted to go, my schedule wouldn't allow it. 4 o'clock, wallow in self-pity. 4:30, stare into the abyss. 5 o'clock, solve world hunger. Tell no one. 5:30, jazzercise. 6:30, dinner with me. I can't cancel that again. 7 o'clock, wrestle with my self-loathing. I'm booked. Of course, if I bumped the loathing to 9, I could still be done in time to lay in bed, stare at the ceiling, and slip slowly into madness. But what would I wear?
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Sounds like a job. Verbal dioramas. Watches all the movies from comedy to drama. From the top roll sound. And don't forget the action. She'll watch until the end and then she'll give you her reaction. Movies you know, movies you don't. Prequel, sequels, remakes, and trivia and outtake. Movies you know, movies you don't. Interesting stories, all the categories.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma and welcome to Verbal Diorama episode 280, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. This is the podcast that's all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't that's inside a snowflake like the one on your sleeve. There happened a story you must hear to believe. And as always, a huge hi and welcome to Verbal Diorama, whether you are a brand new listener, whether you are a regular returning listener. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to listen to this podcast. I'm so happy to have you here for the history and legacy of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, but mostly I'm happy because it is Christmas. I hope that you are enjoying the Christmas festivities, whether you celebrate Christmas or not. But if you do, it looks like you might have been a bit naughty this year. And that's why you've got this episode on How the Grinch Stole Christmas, because this episode is only being sent to the people on the naughty list. But it's okay, because even being on the naughty list can be redeemed, and you can start by basically listening to this episode. Now, I'm not suggesting your heart is 2 sizes too small, but we can all appreciate the little things and the true meaning of Christmas. So obviously this month is kind of a Christmassy themed season. So far we've had the very festive Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves and the slightly more festive Lethal Weapon. How the Grinch Stole Christmas is a movie that my mum absolutely owns. She hates this movie. And it wasn't the first choice for the naughty list either, but it turns out it pairs really well with the nice list episode. And while no one wants to annoy their mum at Christmas, or indeed at any time of the year, I couldn't really help but look into the history and legacy of a movie that may not be on my mum's Christmas list, but stems from a beloved Dr Seuss classic and ended up being nominated for 3 Oscars. Here's the crescendo of my odious opus, aka the trailer for How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
You're the
The Grinch!
Jim Carrey is the Grinch.
On the outskirts of Whoville, a green hermit known as the Grinch, whose heart is 2 sizes too small, has been living in Mount Crumpet with his only friend and pet dog, Max. The Grinch put himself in exile due to his hatred for Christmas, and after he was bullied at school trying to impress his childhood crush, Martha May Whovier, he ran away in humiliation. Years later, young Cindy Lou Who believes there is good in the Grinch, and because Christmas is a time for being with loved ones, she extends an invitation to the Grinch to join the town's festivities. But he's ridiculed again and vows to take revenge. The Grinch devises a plot to ruin Christmas by dressing up as Santa and stealing all the presents to ruin Whoville's Christmas once and for all. Let's run through the cast. We have Jim Carrey as the Grinch, Taylor Momsen as Cindy Lou Who, Jeffrey Tambor as Mayor Augustus Mayhew, Christine Baranski as Martha May Whovier, Bill Irwin as Lou Who, Molly Shannon as Betty Lou Who, and Anthony Hopkins as the narrator. How the Grinch Stole Christmas has a screenplay by Jeffrey Price and Peter S. Seaman, was based on How the Grinch Stole Christmas by Dr. Seuss, and was directed by Ron Howard. Our story starts soon. Here it is. It's The Hook, a story of Christmas, of a loved children's book. How the Grinch Stole Christmas, a creature so sour. Let's have it on a podcast for just under an hour. Theodore Geisel was his name. He wrote under a pseudonym. Dr. Seuss was the author, or writer, that's a synonym. He published over 60 books during his long literary career. Let's hope he occasionally rested and drank a cold beer. His most famous, The Grinch and the Cat in the Hat, The Lorax and Horton Hears a Who, don't forget about that. He passed in 1991 on the 24th of September. Through his works of him we remember. And this is why he wrote in Anapestic Tetrameter and I don't. Dr. Seuss, or Dr. Seuss, his own pronunciation of the pen name he chose, based on his mother's maiden name, he actually switched to the anglicised pronunciation of Seuss. So that's what I'm going to continue to use for the episode. I'm also going to continue to use his pen name, Dr. Seuss, instead of his actual legal name, Theodore Geisel. But Dr. Seuss was never something we grew up with here in the UK. In fact, I didn't even know the Grinch was a thing. I thought it was a Home Alone thing when I was a kid. Because in both movies, Kevin McAllister watches the 1966 animated version. So I just thought it was an Angels with Filthy Souls kind of thing. Speaking of which, Dr. Seuss was famously reluctant to have his characters in anything other than his own books. But he did agree on animated adaptations, starting with Horton Hatches the Egg in 1942. And in 1966, he authorised his friend and former war colleague, Chuck Jones, he of Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, to make an animated version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, which was narrated by Boris Karloff, who also provided the voice of the Grinch. The Grinch first appeared in a 33-line illustrated poem by Dr. Seuss called The Hubbub and the Grinch, which was originally published in the May 1955 edition of Redbook magazine, and How the Grinch Stole Christmas was then published in December 1957. The 1966 television special was produced in a year on a budget of $315,000 and premiered on Sunday the 18th of December 1966 in the US and airs multiple times perennially. This special is the first time the Grinch was coloured green, a decision made by Dr. Seuss and Chuck Jones, rather than the original black and white sketches in the books. The character has been green ever since. While Boris Karloff narrated and provided the voice for the Grinch, he didn't sing the song You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch. Phil Ravenscroft was mistakenly uncredited for providing the song's vocals. Seuss called Ravenscroft personally to apologise for the oversight and later wrote letters to colonists nationwide telling them it was Ravenscroft who provided vocals for the musical number. Despite the animated specials of his work, Dr. Seuss consistently refused to option for live-action film rights despite being asked, although he was writing a screen adaptation of Oh, the Places You'll Go at the time of his death. After his death in 1991, his widow, Audrey Geisel, started to realise that the love and passion people had for Dr. Seuss and his characters was going to continue with or without her late husband. Oh, the places this merchandising could go. And Dr. Seuss Enterprises was born. And the places this merchandising has gone. From the 100-acre theme park, Seuss Landing at Universal Islands of Adventure in Orlando, Florida, to Seussical the Musical, a $10 million musical pastiche of several of Dr. Seuss's stories, Audrey Geisel might be seen as some by selling out her late husband's work, but she's incredibly particular how and to whom the characters are licensed, and much of the profits are donated to the Dr. Seuss Foundation, which supports the arts, education and social services in California, as well as the Dr. Seuss Fund, which supports charitable organisations in San Diego. And she was also a staunch supporter of a woman's right to choose. in response to an anti-abortion movement using the line, "A person's a person no matter how small," from Horton Hears a Who, Geisel not only threatened legal action, she also donated to Planned Parenthood. She was aided in her merchandising decisions by Carl Zobel, vice president of Dr Seuss Enterprises, and ICN agent Herb Chayette, and received universal veto power over almost every aspect of the adaptations or use of the licensing. Audrey Geisel would pass away in December 2018 at the age of 97. It was Audrey Geisel who gave the go-ahead for studios to bid for the rights for How the Grinch Stole Christmas, but as always, she was incredibly specific about what she wanted. You won't be surprised to hear she also had significant control over what ended up in the finished movie. Except for keys in a bowl. She was fine with that. Geisel's representative sent a letter to producers in July 1998 informing them that the rights to How the Grinch Stole Christmas were being auctioned off. Prospective studio suitors had to be prepared to pay $5 million for the content and provide Geisel 70% of the money from book tie-ins, 50% of the merchandise and music-related revenue, and 4% of the box office gain in order to present their proposals. Any actors submitted for The Grinch must be of comparable stature to Jack Nicholson, Jim Carrey, Robin Williams, and Dustin Hoffman, the letter added. Furthermore, no writer or director who had not made at least $1 million on a prior movie would even be given consideration by the estate of Dr Seuss. Half a dozen studios pursued the rights when they went to auction, including 20th Century Fox, who had been after the rights for years at this point. Universal, which had already made a major investment with their Seuss landing at Universal Studios Orlando, came out on top, despite having to agree to Geisel's demands for shared revenue. Universal would part with $9 million for the rights to How the Grinch Stole Christmas and Oh, the Places You'll Go. Producer Brian Grazer and potential director Gary Ross's pitch didn't meet Geisel's requirements, and Ron Howard was then brought on board to join negotiations. He was convinced by Grazer to pitch to Geisel his ideas to develop the character of Cindy Lou, give her an expanded role, flesh out the Who's of Whoville, and give the Grinch a backstory as to how he'd come to hate the Who's so much. Geisel was happy, and Ron Howard became the director after giving her his pitch. As for the casting of Jim Carrey, Geisel obviously wanted a big-name actor, and Carrey had been on her list. They met after the rights went up for auction, and instead of shaking her hand, Carrey spun her around, held her close, and made a Grinch face the only way Jim Carrey could. She knew she'd found her Grinch. At this point, Carrey wouldn't know the sacrifices he would have to make to bring the character to life, but it was a character he loved, that he grew up with, and ultimately a character that told you a lot about human behaviour and how a person forms prejudice. Actors like Eddie Murphy and Jack Nicholson were considered, but Carrey was the ideal choice. He was filming Man on the Moon at the time auditions were taking place, and he was method acting as Andy Kaufman during that production, insisting on everyone calling him Andy. Even when reading for The Grinch, it wasn't Jim Carrey auditioning, it was Andy Kaufman, and apparently this is what convinced Audrey Geisel that he was right for the role, because he could clearly lose himself in the characters he played. The screenplay was written by Jeffrey Price and Peter S. Seaman, most well known for writing Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Doc Hollywood. They would write 8 drafts, with Geisel insisting on the removal of sexual humour, but again, not keys in a bowl. She was specific, and there was a lot she didn't approve of, but in her mind, she wanted to make a movie her late husband would have wanted to see, and hey, who are we to judge if they like those kind of parties? The team of Alec Berg, David Mandel, and Jeff Schaffer did uncredited rewrites on the script. And while the original animation is fairly straightforward, a simple story of the Grinch attempting to ruin Christmas for the Who's of Whoville before realising Christmas isn't about capitalism, this version would indeed go into the backstory of how the Grinch became the Grinch, including his adoption by 2 Who women, being bullied at school by the future Mayor Augustus Mayhew, finding young love with the impeccably put-together Martha May Whovier, and then meeting young Cindy Lou Who, now a precocious 6-year-old, rather than the 2-year-old in the book and animation. And it's Cindy Lou who puts all of this together. The cast was rounded out by known names like Jeffrey Tambor, Christine Baranski, Molly Shannon, and Bill Irwin, with Anthony Hopkins spending a day recording his narration. Taylor Momsen stars as Cindy Lou in her breakout role, and the reason she's not in the traditional Who prosthetics is simply that because she was a child, she wasn't permitted to use prosthetics by law, so it was added into the story that Who children grew into their Who faces. But making Whoville and its citizens come to life was one thing, it was another to turn Jim Carrey into the Grinch. And the three things that this movie excels in, it got Academy Award nominations for. And what it eventually won an Oscar for was the excellent makeup by Rick Baker and Gail Rowell-Ryan. Renowned makeup artist Rick Baker designed and created the prosthetic makeup for Jim Carrey, as well as for each and every Who. Baker's initial design was used, and the entire Grinch costume was a spandex suit with individually dyed green yak hair sewn into the suit. Carrey would be in the suit for a total of 92 days, and it was hardly a comfortable experience. The experience also included the full facial prosthetic, which took 8.5 hours initially to put on, although they eventually got it down to 2.5 hours, and additionally yellow contact lenses, which irritated his eyes. Carrey described the process as being buried alive every day, and he would take out his frustrations on the makeup artist assigned to him, Kazuhiro. Carrey would often shout at Hero, and it ended up with the makeup artist leaving the set due to mental exhaustion. This would lead to Carrey changing his attitude, realising how valuable Hero was to the production, and Hero ultimately returned to a changed atmosphere on set. It also led to Hero getting letters of recommendation from the filmmakers for his green card application, which was ultimately successful after the Grinch makeup won an Oscar and a BAFTA. Even Josh Ryan Evans, who played the Grinch at 8 years old, also had to go through the same makeup and bodysuit as Carrey. Evans was actually 18 at the time. He had a form of dwarfism, leading him to look and sound like a small child. He passed away from complications during surgery for a congenital heart condition 2 years later. Jim Carrey's horrifying experience in the costume and makeup would lead to producer Brian Grazer hiring trained CIA operatives to train Carrey on how to cope with torture, which led to Carrey starting a smoking habit. A lot of Carrey's issues seem to stem from his previous work on Man on the Moon, and Carrey had even admitted as much in the documentary Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond. Even Ron Howard donned the suit and makeup for a day and directed scenes dressed as the Grinch. Carrey's mimicking of Howard's directing style was improvised by Carrey on set, and Howard loved the impression so much of the Grinch directing his dog Max that he kept it in the final cut of the movie. This movie was also nominated for the Academy Awards for Best Art Direction and Best Costume Design. The costuming here is by Rita Ryak, who also worked on Casino, Apollo 13, also with Ron Howard, and would go on to work on the other live-action Dr Seuss adaptation, The Cat in the Hat, as well as the film version of the musicals Hairspray and Rock of Ages. While The Who's clothing was kept basic in the 1957 children's book and the 1966 animated television special, with nightgowns, leggings, coats and bow ties in simplified colour schemes, Ryak was encouraged to get imaginative with the live-action version and to capture Seuss's drawings in 3D. The answer was 3D clothing, plenty of textures, layering, tufts, tulle, fleece, pom-poms, chenille, crochet, mohair, fluff and fuzz. The base layer to each costume was a padded bodysuit, giving each Who a distinct pear shape. The only difference would be Martha May, played by Christine Baranski, who was all 50s elegance, and Ryak took inspiration from Queen Elizabeth II's coronation and the fashion of her sister Princess Margaret, with tight bodices, flowing skirts and highlighting femininity. Another inspiration for Martha May's clothing was Lucille Ball, with the trouser and dress combination, the hostess outfit, as featured in I Love Lucy. So popular are Ryak's costumes for Martha May that she has somewhat of a following online, with YouTube tutorials on how to make the costumes at home, as well as Etsy's marketplace selling replicas of the powder blue and white ostrich feather robe, as well as her Christmas gown with its sweetheart neckline and forest green tulle skirt. Luckily for Ryak, Baranski was up for wearing anything, even a red and white fur-trimmed Santa mini dress while shooting Christmas lights out of a cannon. Listen, we all know the pain of putting up Christmas lights. We all want Martha May's ingenuity as well as her killer fashion sense. Even other characters like Betty Lou Who had a teacup fascinator paired with a plaid corset dress, which was emulated by the fashion house Versace, with store mannequins adorned in teacup hats. Cindy Lou Who wore Peter Pan collared dresses and coats. The fashion in How the Grinch Stole Christmas might not be the first thing you think of, but the Oscar-nominated costume work has endured for over 20 years. The Universal Studios backlot was used to construct the Whoville set, which was located behind the famous Bates Motel from Psycho. The majority of the sets were constructed entirely on sound stages. Stage 12, for example, contained the town set. The production used 10 sound stages in total, and it remains one of the most space-intensive productions ever shot at Universal. 1,938 candy canes were used in the decoration of the sets, and enough fake paper snow was used to cover 9 football pitches. The sets were regularly repainted, as they were never originally designed to be outdoors beyond the shooting schedule. But they were eventually torn down in 2020 after a sustained period of deterioration. Filming on How the Grinch Stole Christmas took place from September 1999 to January 2000. And while a lot in the movie was practical, the atmosphere surrounding Whoville and the snowflake it was on was all created digitally by Digital Domain. And the reason behind digital visual effects was always, does this effect further the story? If not, it didn't happen, but if it did, it enhanced the world that had already been so painstakingly and lovingly crafted. Virtually everyone involved in the movie had grown up reading or watching adaptations of Dr Seuss's stories. Digital Domain created a CGI sleigh for the shot where it teeters over the edge of the mountain, and the Grinch's sleigh ride down Mount Crumpit and into Whoville was filmed on a blue screen with Taylor Momsen and Jim Carrey. The actors and the sleigh were to be composited into the second unit's background plates, which showed a snowy Utah hill. However, the weather in Whoville differed from that in the Utah background plates. The mythical trees in Seuss's tale didn't exactly resemble Utah's natural vegetation, so these were all added digitally, tens of thousands of them, using 10 proxy tree models which were tweaked with various branch styles, shapes and sizes. Animators also added 3D snow, which fell intelligently onto surfaces, sticking to certain areas and not others, mimicking real-life snowfall. Even the 2D painted clouds were rendered in 3D and moved in proximity to the horizon and given form and motion. Practical snow and wind couldn't be used on the set due to Carrey's eye irritation problems, which also led to some scenes with him having digitally enhanced yellow eyes. While Max the dog was mostly played by a rescue called Kelly for the main stunts, Max was also rendered in CG for some scenes. Even the Who's of Whoville were comprised of mostly human actors, but also there was a cast of digital Who's to fill out crowd scenes such as the Whobilation. Up to 200 animated characters were shown in some shots, 25% of Whoville was practical sets, and the other 75% was created digitally. Ron Howard had a firm plan that the film would contain 260 visual effects shots altogether. In the end, however, there were more than 300 major effect shots. Digital Domain did 356 shots. They count as 40 minutes of visual effects in the film, including 35 shots that are completely CG. All in all, including minor shots, The Grinch contains about 600 visual effects shots, but the majority is done so well that you simply can't tell. Back to Max, though, because Max was actually played by 6 different dogs, and they were all mixed-breed shelter rescues that had their fur cut and dyed to match each other. The 2 lead dogs were Kelly and Chip, with Kelly doing most of the stunts, and the other 4 were Topsy, Stella, Zelda and Bo. Animal trainer Roger Schumacher spent 3.5 months practicing with the dogs prior to filming to perfect their stunts and acclimate them to the set environment. All of the dogs were adopted by various crew members or studio staff, and no dogs were returned to shelters after filming. Topsy, Stella, Zelda and Bo retired from show business shortly after. And speaking of show business, it's really the only way I can segue here. Let's go into the obligatory Keanu reference for this episode, which is where I try and link the movie that I'm featuring with Keanu Reeves for no reason other than he is the best of men. And unless you're the Grinch, all men should aspire to be a bit more like Keanu Reeves. Now, Keanu Reeves, as Google's AI search bot helpfully told me, is not associated with the Grinch. That is the power of AI, folks, right there. However, he will be working with Jim Carrey in the upcoming Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which, I will be going to the cinema to see with my nephew because he is a huge fan. Carey obviously plays Dr. Robotnik, and Keanu Reeves voices Shadow. And the original Sonic the Hedgehog would actually be a great movie for the podcast, I think, because you remember that Sonic redesign, right? How awesome would it be to go into the history and legacy of that? Maybe that's one for next year. So Jim Carrey performs the song You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, in character as the Grinch, singing about himself. Taylor Momsen also sings Where Are You Christmas, which was written by the one and only Mariah Carey, James Horner and Will Jennings. Mariah Carey also wrote a full-length pop version of the song with additional lyrics for the film's soundtrack. The song was originally recorded by Carey, but because of a legal case and an acrimonious divorce from her ex-husband Tommy Mottola, it couldn't be released, so it was re-recorded and released by Faith Hill. The score for the movie was composed by James Horner, and the soundtrack also features songs by Smash Mouth, Busta Rhymes, and Bare Naked Ladies. To coincide with the film's release, Universal used their previous collaborations with the Seuss name to promote the holiday movie, with Universal Studios Hollywood and Universal's Islands of Adventure introducing Grinchmas, a holiday event that has since become an annual tradition at the theme parks. Toys R Us also turned their stores into Hubilation headquarters, with floor-to-ceiling graphics and 8-foot Grinch characters. How the Grinch Stole Christmas had its premiere on the 8th of November 2000 at the Universal Amphitheatre and was released on the 17th of November 2000 in the US, where it hit number 1 at the domestic box office, dethroning Charlie's Angels. Love that movie. The Grinch may hate Christmas, but he loved being on top of the US box office, staying there for 4 weeks. Even the 2000 Dungeons & Dragons movie came out in its 4th week and could only manage to hit number 5. Have a listen to Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, the episode from 2 episodes ago, for a little bit about that 2000 Dungeons & Dragons movie. The Grinch would be removed from number 1 in its 5th week by What Women Want, and the Grinch would stick around the top 10 for 7 weeks, coincidentally only coming out of the top 10 after Christmas had finished. On its $123 million budget, How the Grinch Stole Christmas grossed $260.7 million domestically in the US and $85.1 million internationally, for a total worldwide gross of $345.8 million, making it the 6th highest grossing film worldwide of 2000. It held the record for the highest opening weekend for a Christmas-themed film for 18 years at $55.1 million, until the 2018 animated version of The Grinch surpassed it with $67.6 million. On the 20th of November 2001, How the Grinch Stole Christmas was released on VHS and DVD just in time for the Christmas 2001 rush, becoming the best-selling holiday home video title at the time, selling 3 million DVDs and 4 million VHSs in its first week alone. It also became the 2nd highest home video sales opening week of any live-action movie after Titanic. By December 2001, it had sold 16.9 million copies in home video formats and grossed $296 million just from VHS and DVD sales. And in the 2020s, we just don't see numbers like that anymore. Unsurprisingly, critics were mixed. Rotten Tomatoes has a rating of 49%, with the site's critical consensus reading, Jim Carrey shines as the Grinch. Unfortunately, it's not enough to save this movie. You'd be better off watching the TV cartoon. Critics were agreed that Carrey was perfectly cast, but the overall tone of the movie skewed too dark. When it came to awards season, though, as I mentioned, How the Grinch Stole Christmas ended up with 3 Academy Award nominations for Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, and Best Makeup, winning for Makeup for Rick Baker and Gail Rowell Ryan. It was also nominated for a Best Actor, Musical or Comedy Golden Globe for Jim Carrey, who would lose to George Clooney for Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? But it was also nominated for 2 Golden Raspberry Awards, Worst Remake or Sequel and Worst Screenplay, as well as 3 Stinkers Bad Movie Awards for Worst Supporting Actress, Worst Song or Song Performance, and Worst Screenplay. So it kind of balances each other out, really. Now, obviously, there were no sequels to this movie, but there is technically a remake of this movie. Technically, a couple of remakes. In 2018, Illumination released The Grinch, an animated reboot with Benedict Cumberbatch as the character. In 2022, an unauthorized horror parody called The Mean One was released. I think it's safe to say that Audrey Geisel would not have given permission for it had she been alive. The character is green, but not referred to as the Grinch, presumably because copyright, just The Mean One. But here in the UK, The Mean One is available on Amazon Prime Video. If you're interested in watching it, I have not watched it. However, I did notice it was on Amazon Prime Video, as is How the Grinch Stole Christmas, which is where I watched it. So maybe you could do a back-to-back of both of those. But just going back to Illumination, because the animated version of The Grinch is a perfectly fine movie. I enjoyed it very much, actually. It's beautifully animated, bright, colourful, and very, very flawless. And I mean that in a good way, because CG animation is technically flawless, but also in a bad way. CG animation is technically flawless. Every pixel is perfect, every shot crystal clear, and every joke is sanitized. Compare that, if you will, to the 1966 animated original, with its hand-drawn quality, occasional missteps in missing cells, occasional colour mismatch issues, and somewhat janky quality. The book and the original animation became perfect in their imperfections. And this leads me perfectly to How the Grinch Stole Christmas, a movie with a gifted director, a big-name star, state-of-the-art technology, and practical effects and makeup that isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and yet, somehow, it also is. It tries to be as faithful as possible to the original text, while also fleshing out a small story to a feature-length live-action movie. I look at this movie and I just see the wild ambition on clear display. Ambition that could never be present in the 2018 version, as beautiful as it is. It was always going to be tough to adapt a story that contains more spirit than actual plot. Making a feature-length film out of a 26-minute animated short was going to be a challenge. And I know, live-action remakes are never my thing. But credit where credit's due when a live-action remake has this sort of incredible production design, and it casts the right person for the role. Jim Carrey really is great. The only thing I think about this movie is I agree with the critics that it does skew a little dark at times, and tonally feels a little bit all over the place. Still, if it got the okay from Audrey Geisel, then it must have satisfied her. Christmas can be a tough time for some people. It has become highly commercialised, focusing on capitalism and buying as much as possible. It's a real struggle sometimes to be able to afford it all, especially during a cost of living crisis, when inflation is high, and even tougher if you don't have family or friends close by to be with at Christmas. Christmas can be a lonely time, and sometimes that loneliness is self-imposed because of mental health issues, or maybe just because Christmas is traumatic. Just because you love Christmas or celebrate it, it doesn't mean someone else will. The Grinch may be heartless and selfish, but he has his reasons. And all Cindy Lou saw was someone who'd been ostracised and offered him a chance to be accepted. But he needed to want that acceptance. And when he learns Christmas is about more than presents, he finally has that will to change and give the Who's a chance to give him a chance. And sometimes we all need to look at things as if we were a small child like Cindy Lou, without prejudice, without grievance, without trauma, without everything that can maybe hold us back from accepting things into our lives. You may or may not believe in Santa. I personally like to track him via NORAD every year. But we should all believe in the power of forgiveness, togetherness, compassion, and presence over presents at Christmas. Your kid isn't going to remember the Mega Blaster 3000 you bought them this year, but they will remember if you were around on Christmas Day. That's the ultimate message of this movie. Let's not be mean ones. It's okay if your heart grows 3 sizes. And even if you are on the naughty list, you might also end up on the nice list. What if Christmas, she thought, doesn't come from a store? What if Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more? Welcome Christmas, bring your cheer. Cheer to all who's far and near. Christmas Day is in our grasp so long as we have hands to clasp. Christmas Day will always be just as long as we have we. Welcome Christmas while we stand, heart to heart and hand in hand. Thank you for listening. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and thank you for your continued support of this podcast this year and throughout all of the years. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to you all. If you have enjoyed this episode and you want to help it grow, you could tell your friends and family, you could leave a rating or review wherever you found it, or you can find me on social media. I am at Verbal Diorama on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. Tomorrow, the Nice List and the Nice List only get an episode on the modern classic feel-good Christmas movie. Let's go through the rules. Number 1, treat every day like Christmas. Number 2, there's room for everyone on the Nice List. Yep, even you. And number 3, the best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loud for all to hear. It's the code of the elves for a reason, because the next Christmas episode is on the history and legacy of Elf. And if you're listening to this episode on release day and you think you're on the Nice List, you'll get that episode tomorrow. And I always say this podcast is free and it always will be free. However, it is unfortunately not free to make a podcast. I am very fortunate in that I have a team of wonderful people who support me financially. And if you are in the position to do so, that would be amazing. But of course, you're under no obligation. There are 2 ways you can help this podcast continue to thrive. You could make a one-off donation at verbaldiorama.com/tips, or you could support the show every month at verbaldiorama.com/Patreon by going to Patreon and signing up for one of the 6 tiers on Patreon. A huge thank you to the amazing patrons of this podcast who continue to support me amazingly. They are Sade, Claudia, Simon, Laurel, Derek, Kat, Andy, Mike, Luke, Michael, Scott, Brendan, Lisa, Sam, Jack, Dave, Stuart, Nicholas So, Kev, Pete, Heather, Danny, Ali, Stu, Brett, Philip N, Michelle, Zenos, Sean, Rhino, Philip K, Adam, Elaine, Kyle, and Aaron. If you want to get in touch, you can say hello. You can give me some feedback at verbaldiorama@gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, verbaldiorama.com, and fill out the little contact form. You can also find bits that I do at filmstories.co.uk as well. You can see the latest issue of the magazine on sale, and also online articles. And finally,
every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, was singing without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It came.
Somehow or other, it came just the same.
Mr. Grinch!
And the Grinch, with his Grinch feet ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling and puzzling.
How could it be so? It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, or bags.
And he puzzled and puzzled till his puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before.
Maybe Christmas
He thought,
doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more.
Max! Help me! I'm feeling...
and what happened then, well, Whoville, they say that the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day.
Bye, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Movies you know, movies you don't.